Welcome to part 2 of the Ironman PVM progression guide. In the last part, we finished by getting the tier 90 two-handed weapons from Araxor. This leaves us in a very good position to do a lot more PVM content. The first leg of the journey is to start filling out some armor to match your weapons. Now, from completing Araxor, you should have gotten enough Serenic scales to make the tier 90 ranged power armor. We also talked about doing rods in the last part, which will fill out the tier 90 melee armor if you don't have high enough mining and smithing to get masterwork. This means the only star where you do not have decent armor is magic, so we will start there. With your tier 90 weapons, your next step would be to go back to God Wars Dungeons 2 to kill Hellware. Pretty much everything Hellware drops will be useful. First, you will want the wand so you can do some rolls in group PVM. Having the wand will allow you to do damage while using a shield. Getting the orb is also useful as it allows you to do 4-tick auto attacking. This will greatly improve your mage DPS. I am not going to go into details about what 4-tick auto attacking is here, but it is something to learn if you are committed to PVMing. Finally, you can get the Seren armor, which is the tier 80 magic armor, which will be useful for our next step. With these gear upgrades, the first thing you can look to do is to join Virago teams. You should have no issues doing Virago with your Nox staff and your tier 80 Seren armor. Since we also obtain Hellware wand and the tier 90 shields from rods, you can easily get on teams by doing the roles such as base or bomb tank. While this technically isn't part of the bossing guide or back bossing path, if you are doing archaeology and are close to or having gotten the Inquisitor staff, you should use it here instead of your Nox staff. Doing Virago will grant you access to tier 90 mage power armor Tectonic, as well as the chance to get tier 90 magic dual wield, seismic wand and orb. Getting dual seismic will be really nice as it will make your 4-tick auto attack a lot stronger. So it will increase your DPS as well as increase your DPS when you are using a shield. But it is not necessary. So do not worry too much if you don't get it before completing your armor. Now that you have your tier 90 magic weapon and tier 90 magic armor, you want to start looking for AOD teams for group bossing. AOD is Angel of Death, so the hard mode of Next, if you will. You will want to do AOD teams or look for AOD teams while doing some Telos during team downtimes. Just a quick note, at this stage, the only high level range gear you will have is the Nox bow. We are severely lacking in the range department, so you will most likely want to use magic as your main style at AOD. If you're finding it difficult to get into teams with magic, or if you're going very dry on AOD, feel free to skip forward and get some range upgrades first. Then you can come back with your ramped up range gear, which will not only be stronger than magic, but also allow you to chin, which allows you to better kill the minions. From AOD, you will get the tier 99 prayers for all 3 styles. You will also get the tier 92 magic dual wield, Praisal wand and Imperium core, which is a huge plus for what we are going to do next. Now, the tier 99 prayers is a priority here, so that should be your focus. The tier 92 magic weapons, similar with Virago, is nice to have, a nice bonus, but you don't need to stay here until you get those 2 weapons. What we're going to do next is Telos. Similar to Araxor, Telos will drop all 3 styles of the tier 92 weapon. With Telos, you'll be able to upgrade your tier 90 weapons from Araxor to tier 92 weapons. Again, like with Virago, if you have the Inquisitor staff, you should use that instead of your Nox staff. The 3 Telos weapons are Zero Scar Sword, Seren Godbow, and Celeste's staff. At the time I'm making this video, Celeste's staff is almost entirely obsolete, being completely outclassed by the Inquisitor staff anywhere where mage is still being used for PVMing. Zero's Scar Sword is very useful as its spec is key to a good melee rotation, not to mention it is a tier 92 melee weapon. Seren Gobble is also very useful as its special combined with the ability Ingenuity of the humans allows you to do big damage on large targets. So those two weapons should be your main focus, and getting the Celeste staff, while is nice, is not necessary. Telos will also drop the Reprisal Codex. Reprisal Codex is something that you do not really need. Its use is very niche, only useful for things like dual Virago. If you have somehow managed to complete your weapon sets before getting the Codex, feel free to move on. After doing Virago, AOD and Telos, your mage gear will pretty much be all sorted. The next thing we will focus on is melee. In the endgame, melee is stronger than magic, but weaker than ranged. But in terms of ease of access, the upgrades are easier to obtain than ranged. This is why we're going to start with the melee upgrades rather than the ranged upgrades. To start our melee journey, we're going to do Elite Dungeons 2. For all Elite Dungeons, I will recommend doing them solo to get the best drop rates. The reason why Elite Dungeons are so far down the progression path is because I'm considering the difficulty of the dungeons when doing them solo. You are of course free to do them in teams. While the drop rate is worse, the entire dungeon is easier and it might prevent you from going absolutely insane running the dungeons over and over and over and over again. Doing ED2 will get us Draconic Energy, which will allow us to upgrade our tier 90 Tectonic armor to tier 92 Elite Tectonic. By doing this, the armor will no longer degrade in Elite Dungeons, and essentially you can farm out Elite Dungeons as much as you want without worrying about charges. ED2 also drops the 3 muted melee ability codex, and this is the key to why we're here. The 3 codex are Mutated Fury, Mutated Flurry, and Mutated Barge. Having these mutated abilities will massively improve your melee DPS rotation. Out of these mutated abilities, that is very hard to say, I will say the Flurry and Barge are absolutely crucial. The Fury is just a nice to have. So if you're going dry on getting the Fury, and you have gotten the Flurry and Barge, you can move on to other bosses and come back at a later point in time. All the grinds at this point in time will probably take you hundreds of hours unless you're spoon-fed, so it is important not to get burnt out on a single boss. Here, I will be talking about 2 Detours once you're done with ED2. Whether you take the Detours is entirely up to you. There are pros to cons to taking and not taking Detours, which I will explain here. The first Detour I will talk about is Nex. That is the regular Nex, the normal Nex, not Angel of Death Nex. Normal Nex drops tier 80 power armor, which actually is pretty redundant for most players since it is much easier to farm tier 90 power armor from God Wars Dungeon 2. And this path of going down God Wars Dungeon 2 instead of Nex is what we have done in this guide. However, Nex still plays a very key role. The tier 80 power armor that Nex drops, Torva, Pernex, and Virtus are required to make the tier 92 elite melee, ranged, and magic armor. As you're doing elite dungeons, you might want to take a detour to do Nex with your Seren Godbow to get the pieces required to upgrade your Tectonic to elite Tectonic. At the same time, you can get Torva to upgrade your Masterwork to Trim Masterwork, and you can get Pernex for when you want to upgrade your Serenic to Elite Serenic. However, do note that your Seren Godbow is pretty weak compared to its crossbow counterparts due to the lack of back bolts. It is technically more efficient in terms of kill speed to do Nex last after you've gotten your tier 92 crossbows. However, this does mean you will need to put up with no tier 92 armor. What you decide to do is entirely up to your playstyle, whether you can deal with tier 90 armor, or whether you're okay doing Nex with less than optimal range gear. Of course, if you have grinded out Ascension's crossbow through Slayer, then by all means go and do Nex with Ascensions. In fact, if you did do this, I would actually recommend you grind out Nex at this point in time. However, I personally will not recommend players to do the extension grind if they are decent at PVM, as I believe it is more efficient to do Solak for Blight Bounce, which is better than extensions in every single way. The second detour, which I want to talk about, is Calfire King. Calfire King drops Drygors, which are the tier 90 melee dual wield weapons. Having these will improve your melee damage as you can do cleave and decimate ability switching by switching between the dual wield Drygors and your two-handed Zero Scar sword. However, Calfire King is a very dated boss, and its other drops outside of Drygors are essentially worthless. Drygors are also entirely replaceable by Khopesh, which are the tier 92 melee dual wield you obtain from Magister. I won't be talking about the Magister here. Similar to extensions, it is more of a Slayer monster rather than a PVM monster. When you do this boss depends not on how far you get into PVMing, but how high your Slayer is. If you are a tryhard who wants to do melee swapping and a long way from doing Magister, I would recommend taking this detour and kill some Calfire Kings. Otherwise, I would recommend you to skip Calfire Kings and just kill Magister to complete your melee setup. The final thing to consider on Calfire Kings is whether you want to have a flanking switch for your endgame gear. Whether you do this, I will explain the arguments in maybe another video because there is not enough time for me to go into flanking currently. But this is something you might want to keep in mind. Once you are done with Elite Dungeons 2 and decided if you want to go down the Detours route, your next step will be Elite Dungeons 3. We are doing Elite Dungeons out of order as Elite Dungeon 1 gives the least useful upgrades. Elite Dungeons 3 or ED3 is when we can finally start getting those really big ranged upgrades. The final boss in ED3, the Ambassador, drops the Eldritch Crossbow. This is a tier 92 two-handed crossbow. Not only can it make use of the broken DPS that is back bolts, it also has a special attack, Split Soul, which can make ranged absolutely broken. Once you have gotten your hands on this absolute beast of a weapon, every PVM you do will most likely be range focused. From here, the next biggest upgrade to your range gear will be getting the greater ricochet ability. This is done by killing Raksha. There is not much to say here. After all the bosses you have done so far, Raksha should not pose much of a threat, and with Eldritch Crossbow and Chins, you should be getting really fast kill times here. Once you have your greater ricochet, you will want to complete your range setup by doing Solak when you're group bossing and Elite Dungeons 1 when you are soloing. Solak will give you access to dual wield Blightbound Crossbow. This should be your default range weapon when you're not using Eldritch Crossbow for its spec, as Needle Strike is more powerful than Dazing Shot. Elite Dungeons 2 will let you upgrade the Serenic to Elite Serenic, thereby completing your range setup. And we are pretty much done. We have gone through all the major upgrades and bosses for PVM, and by the end, you should have almost every single endgame gear for PVMing. There are some bosses which I did not touch on, such as Corp and God Wars Dungeons 1. The reason I did not touch on these is because their drops are outdated, and in the current meta, it is not worth doing these bosses in general. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments below. Thank you very much.